Winter had arrived in Broken Scar. Piero could feel it in the crackle of the chilly air as he stepped out of the mill and breathed deeply. His muscles ached from the day's labors, and it felt good to be out of the stuffy confines of the mill house. Most millers had no need to turn the massive millstone themselves to grind the wheat into flour, but Piero had no beast of burden to perform the task for him, and so it fell to him to haul the wheel round and round all by himself. For any other Duero, the task would be nearly impossible, but not for him. Halftroll Piero, the people in town called him, and it was not a name given without reason. Standing at just under 7 feet tall, and with shoulders so broad he had to turn sideways to fit through most doors, Piero was a man of enormous stature by Duero standards. He had never met a full-blooded troll to know how big they were in comparison, but there was not a single man in Broken Scar who even came up past his shoulders. He had been working the mill since he was a mere boy, and once his old father had grown too sick to assist him in the labors, he had inherited the position of the town's only miller. Now, as he breathed in deep the crisp, wintry air, Piero considered his lot in life. Broken Scar was the only home he had ever known, the mill house standing about half a mile from the main thoroughfare, and he had lived there ever since he was born. His mother, the one bless her, had left them when he was a mere babe, over 17 years ago now, but neither Piero nor his father blamed her for going. She had been a troll, a full-blooded, real troll, and Duero country was not an easy place for a troll to live. The houses were too small for a troll to stand upright, the beds too short to accommodate the massive frame, and moreover, no troll could ever truly fit into Duero society. They were an older race, the troll folk, supposedly birthed from the discarded flesh of the fairies, if the Argenta was to be believed. Duero were little folk, and homely compared to the supernatural fairness of their fellow mortals, and though Piero had never met another troll before, there were plenty besides just his father who remembered his mother well. Poliera had been her name, though nobody could agree on which troll house she came from, and every man old enough to recall her brief stay in Broken Scar remembered her. Piero's father spoke often of her dry wit, her infectious smile, and the way her long mane of silky red hair had caught his attention immediately when they had first met. The others in town fixated far more on the almost unbelievable beauty of her, a perfection that made all Duero women seem undesirable by comparison. No one could agree if it was just Poliera herself who had been a particular beauty among her kind, or if all trolls were so fair to look at, but much of her looks had been passed down to her son. How his father had even survived the tryst with her, Piero hadn't a clue, but whenever they spoke of his mother, it was with warmth and affection, no ill will to be had. He found that, as he gathered sacks of flour into his pushcart, he could not say he missed his mother, as odd as it sounded. He had never known her during his younger years, and without any knowledge of what she would have been like, it was impossible for Piero to yearn for someone he had never known. Life here in Broken Scar was simple, uncomplicated and tranquil, and that was something that he could find value in. He supposed his mother would still be out there somewhere, and certainly he would be excited to meet her if she ever came back. But if she did not, well, life went on. He would not shed any tears for her absence. The hamlet had not been home to Poliera, perhaps, but to her progeny it was all he had ever known or needed. Piero had his father to keep him company. He had a myriad of friends in town, and a small host of admirers as well. His mother had given him her good looks, after all, and exotic, fiery red hair. Coupled with his great height and enormous strength, Piero was properly sought after by more than one of the village girls. He smiled at the thought, albeit a bit sheepishly. He was, despite his comeliness, shy with women, and often found himself tongue-tied in conversation with them. The inviting looks from beneath lowered, batting lashes never helped, only serving to exacerbate his discomfort, and usually Piero ended up muttering some excuse and fleeing back to the mill where he could focus on his work or on caring for his father. It was not that he was unattracted to the ladies in town, rather that he actually found them a little intimidating. Other young men of his age seemed to consider courtship to be very serious business, and he had figured that if such was the case he wouldn't want to bungle it and embarrass himself in front of the whole town. Better to let them all just admire his looks from a distance and never get the chance to see what a clumsy fool he was with words. With the pushcart filled to the brim with heavy sacks of fresh ground flour, Piero set off towards town, pausing briefly as he passed by the old abandoned manor just beyond the mill. It had been the house his father had built for his mother when they had been together, huge and luxurious, and partly built with her money, as Poliera had been a woman of some standing in the outside world. When she had left, Edgar had left the manor empty, and returned to living in a small shack beside the mill with Piero. He had explored the old house a number of times throughout his youth, always curious if some old memento of his mother was still left inside, but there had been nothing to find. The house was old by now, and poorly maintained, and while Piero kept on telling himself that it was high time he either restored it or tore it down, he never seemed to have the time or inclination to do either. Besides, the old house could wait. He had far more important matters to attend to this season. He was certain that this last haul of grain for the season was going to net his father and him a sizable profit, enough to keep both of them warm and well-fed throughout the harsh winter months ahead. It was common knowledge that often a miller was a bit better off than most other tradesmen in small towns like Broken Scar, and that had once been the case for Piero and his father as well. Ever since his father had taken ill, however, life had grown far more difficult. He had to work harder and longer than he had done before to afford visits from the physician in the neighboring township, as well as the medicines that the physician supplied them with. Yet, even in spite of the treatments, his father, Edgar, continued to worsen. Piero knew that his father was likely not long for this world, and he was terrified of the day that he would return home to find the old man gone away, and only cold flesh and bone left in his place. But he would fight to keep his father with him as long as possible. Who knew? Perhaps Edgar would make a full recovery, as unlikely as it seemed. Piero was not the sort of fellow to give up on hope, even if that hope seemed to grow dimmer and dimmer every day. The walk to town was not overlong, a mile at best, and Piero knew that he could make the journey there and back to the mill in under an hour. On other days, he would have liked to stop and stroll through Broken Scar's main thoroughfare, seeing the sights, greeting the few friends he had, and perhaps perusing one or two of the shops. Not today. Until his father was either well again or in the earth, he had no more time to spend on frivolous fancies. There was work to be done. The chilly winter air bit at him as he walked. It would not be snow for some time yet, but the leaves had all fled from the boughs above, and the grasses had withered. Winters would be far more hostile in other parts of the world. Piero knew that much, and compared to those places it would be downright balmy around these parts. Still, he did not like the cold, and wished he had wrapped himself in a thicker cloak before beginning his trek. He supposed the tough work of pushing the cart up the hill into town would warm him up, but it was still a ways to go before he reached the base of that hill, and in the meantime he felt the goose flesh ripple on his bare arms, and he shivered. Broken Scar had been built many generations before Piero was born, one of the truly old hamlets that sprinkled the dense woodlands along the coast of Duero country. It had been named for the geographical oddity that had captured cartographers' attention when the modern Duero's ancestors had first emerged from Ernholm and spread out across their little peninsula. A deep, fast-flowing river erupted from beneath the earth some 50 miles to the north of the town, a frigid, underground stream that had leapt up from the earth like a fish leaping out of water. It flowed southwards, winding through the fields that had been tilled around it, until it struck against the base of the hill where the town was built. There the river disappeared beneath the earth once again, dipping down underneath the hill that Piero and his people called home, before bursting out the other side and continuing its merry journey to the sea. From above, as it was drawn on maps, the river was little more than a thin incision in the fabric of Duero country's skin, and the hill a sudden break in the wound, a broken scar, as it were. Someone had penned the name generations ago, and it had stuck ever since. Not that there were many maps of Duero country that bothered much with including Broken Scar. Theirs was a small community, a village of rivermen and anglers to begin with, and supplemented with rich farmlands tended to by a tight-knit community of familial husbands. Piero, as the new miller in all but name, had dealings with the heads of these farms on a regular basis, as barley and wheat were most often the grains that made their way to his mill to be ground, and he would need to provide commission from whatever he sold in town to his suppliers on his way back home. He crested the hill with some difficulty, shoving the pushcart before him with one last prodigious heave, and stopping for a brief rest at the summit. The route that Piero was forced to take into town was the quickest way there from his mill, but hardly the most convenient. There were a number of small tracks and trails that led up the hillside to the main thoroughfare of Broken Scar, but only the main road leading northwards received any tending to or general maintenance. It was, unlike Piero's track, a proper road, weaving up the sides of the incline in a crisscross that made the trek a good deal easier for animals and men alike. Piero had never walked the main road before when he was transporting goods into town. His own trail led to the same spot at the front gate posts of the hamlet, and he could climb it as soon as he reached the base of the hill, rather than having to traverse the circumference to reach where the main road began. Now, as he stood catching his breath, Piero took a moment to check from a distance to see if he recognized the two watchmen who stood lazily at each gatepost, watching for threats that would most likely never come. Fotter he recognized, even from afar, the fellow's opulently groomed mustache sticking off the sides of his face like the whiskers of an enormous tomcat. The other man had his back to Piero, and was dressed in the same rather simple and ill-fitting cloth and mail uniform that all the watchmen shared between them. "Ho, Miller!" Fotter offered him a halloa and a wave of his arm as he approached, pushing his cart ahead of himself. Now the second fellow turned, and Piero knew him to be Rosen, a youth close to his own age, and still a more recent addition to the town watchmen. He supposed that Fotter was likely teaching the younger man the daily ins and outs of what it meant to join the watch. Insofar as Piero could tell, there wasn't a whole lot to it besides standing around and finding ever more inventive ways of passing the long hours of the shift until the next set of watchmen came to relieve them. But he would never say so aloud. "Aye, good morning," Piero waved back, smiling broadly. He had errands to run, certainly, but a few minutes to chat would not cost him much time, so long as he still got the money for his goods and the medicine for his father. "Hard at work today, as usual, eh, Piero?" Fotter stroked his moustache as Piero left his cart at the side of the road and approached the other men. He stood a good few heads taller than either of them, which always made conversations a touch awkward. "Well, as the good book tells us, let thy hands be idle only by the side of the one." Piero shrugged. "And besides which, I need the money." "Suppose your father isn't any better?" Rosen mumbled, rubbing at his runny nose with one shirt-sleeve. "I'm afraid not, or at least not as far as I can tell," Piero admitted. "The physician keeps insisting to me that he will improve so long as I keep administering his medicine, but if things are getting better, I can't see how." "You think maybe the physician is raking you over the coals?" Fotter suggested, giving Piero a severe look. "I wouldn't put it past him." The thought had crossed Piero's mind, certainly, but if the physic really was trying to just trick him out of his coin, what could he do about it? If he were to stop buying from the man, there was no one else in Broken Scar that he could turn to help, and although the medicine he'd been buying had not done much to help, at least not much to treat the symptoms his father was exhibiting, the condition had at least not worsened by much. "It's possible," he shrugged, "but I haven't got any alternatives, have I?" "It's a difficult position to be stuck in, believe you me. I don't envy you at all." Rosen trailed off mid-sentence, and Piero got the distinct impression that his gaze had fixed on something behind him, something down at the bottom of the hill. Peering over his shoulder, he saw that something had indeed emerged from the thick foliage surrounding the main road. Two large, covered wagons were trundling out of the brush, hauled by strong horses. Travelers to Broken Scar were a rare occurrence, or at least travelers that Piero didn't recognize, and none of the usual trade guild insignias were presently painted upon the canvas of each wagon. Driving the first wagon was a tall young man, though puny compared to Piero, wearing dark traveling clothes, a bit weather-stained. The second wagon was being driven by an elderly man in the garb of a servant, bent nearly double at the waist and wrapped in a warm cloak. Striding just beside the lead horse, spear butt thumping on the earth as he walked, was another young man, this one dressed in mail and gambeson that were a touch too large for him. They appeared to be, for all the world, a small caravan of ordinary folk on their way southwards. For what reason was anyone's guess. All conversation ceased as Piero, Rosen, and Fotter all watched the procession. It was an unusual occurrence, and all three men were considering whether the troop was planning to visit the town, or was just passing by on their way to the coast. Piero figured the latter reason would be the most likely, but something nagged at the back of his mind as he watched the man at the seat of the first wagon. He was young, perhaps only Piero's age, maybe a few years older, with a patchy, struggling beard furring his jaw and cheeks. A grim, somber look adorned his features, and it gave the whole procession the look of a funerary march along the road as the horses plodded along slowly up the hill toward the town. Odd time for travelers, wouldn't you say? Fotter leaned over to Piero, stroking his mustache thoughtfully. What do you suppose they're here for? I couldn't say, Piero muttered. Eyes up, old-timer. Rosen gave his companion a light shove on the shoulder. That's our job to find out. He took a step forward, leading with his long ash spear, and called out to the young driver of the caravan as the wagon approached. The one deliver you, traveler, Rosen called out, cupping a hand around his lips. And you, guardsman, the driver returned somberly, with a curt nod of his head. Now that he had drawn closer, Piero could see how he held himself, upright and proud, the finery of his clothes and the nobility of his bearing speaking of a wealthy upbringing. The look on his grim, aquiline face as he surveyed the area was haughty, as if he was taking the measure of everything he saw, and found it wanting. You have our greeting, traveler. Fotter stepped forwards as well, tipping his helmet to the newcomers as if it was a hat. What brings you to our doorstep on the eves of winter? The young man reined in the horses and brought the wagons to a halt as they crested the hill, the second wagon circling around to sit on the side of the road beside the first. The driver tossed the reins to the boy in the mail armor and stepped down from the coach box. He lifted his hand in greeting politely, though his stony features did not shift. I am Ard, he said stiffly. My business in the south is not my own, but rather my brother's. There was a brief and uncomfortable silence as Piero and the guards exchanged confused glances. It was customary for a Duero man to give both his own name and the name of his father. Therefore, if this Ard refrained from revealing his sire's name, there had to be some stain upon his heritage, or otherwise something disreputable about him. And what business of your brother's do you intend to settle with us? Fotter lowered his bushy eyebrows severely over his deep-set eyes, doing his best to match the sternness of their young guest. Piero said nothing, too curious to leave, and yet recognizing that he had no place asking questions just yet. The man called Ard glanced around, and for just a moment his youth showed. A flash of sudden confusion and concern passed over his face, but was gone in an instant. This is the village of Broken Scar, yes? He asked. Aye, came the response, and Ard nodded, seemingly relieved. I come from Ernholm in the north. With me travels my brother's wife, the Lady Corinne, and some servants. The lady has borne my brother 2 newborn sons, and it is believed by physicians in the great city that the fresh air by the coast is better suited to aid a woman in recovery. I was told that we would be expected here. Fotter and Rosen looked at each other again. Rosen quirked an eyebrow, and Fotter shook his head. No word round these parts of strangers coming from up north, especially not from Ernholm. That's, a 4-week journey? Long way to go just for some fresh air. Rosen squinted at Ard. It was all just a little suspicious, Piero had to agree. Ard looked over at his bodyguard, who stood at attention but did not speak. I had sent a runner ahead of us to prepare a house for our arrival, he said a bit lamely. Did our man never arrive? Ain't been no outsiders come to our gates at any time this season. I say your man either lost himself on the road or you didn't fetch your servants well enough. Odds are he took your coin and ran with it, or it could be that someone waylaid him. Roads are safer than they were back during the war, but there's still plenty of ne'er-do-wells lurking about. A fellow journeying alone, he'd be easy pickings." Ard appeared somewhat lost for words. Piero had to remind himself not to laugh or smile, as the haughty expression on the young man's face was replaced with a hint of panic. He composed himself, clicked his fingers, and his bodyguard stepped forward expectantly. "Thel, go relay the news to the lady. Bros was her servant. I will handle this." "Aye, sir." The young man performed a brief salute, and then turned and marched back towards the rear of the lead wagon. Piero found himself intrigued by the mention of this mysterious lady. Ard had said that she was the wife of his brother, and that she had just borne children as well. He had never met nobles before, and it did seem from his appearance and mannerisms that this Ard came from wealth and status in some regard. He wondered if this was the scion of some wealthy guild leaders or house speaker from the capital. Ard, in the meantime, stepped forward and offered a hand to Fotter in a show of good faith. The watchman shifted his spear to his left hand and stepped forwards to grasp the younger man's forearm, and to have his grasped in return. Satisfied that neither man was concealing weapons up his sleeve, they separated. "I pray you will forgive my brusque manners," Ard said, politely enough, but still with that hint of superiority that had tinted all of his words thus far. "We have had a long and tiresome journey southwards. I had hoped to avoid complications upon our arrival." Piero got the distinct impression that he was used to people doing what he said, and even if his manners were impeccable, he had to think of himself as better than low-born men like Piero and the other villagers. "Nothing to forgive." Fodder's face broke into a friendly smile. "Ain't your fault your runner disappeared. Sorry to say there won't be any house prepared, but I'm certain we can have something arranged, just as soon as we have a bit better of an idea who we're dealing with." Ard nodded. "Of course. I would never expect anyone to trust us without proper identification. Our missing runner, Bros, had copies of our papers, but I would have been a fool not to keep the originals. However, I would ask that we be allowed somewhere more comforting, for the lady's sake. 4 weeks of travel with newborn infants to care for has been taxing on her health. Even with nursemaids and wet nurses to aid her, we would all be truly grateful for a chance to rest before we get started. With your permission, of course." Now Rosen stepped forward, still suspicious. "We may not be a big city like Erdholm, but we hold our duty to Broken Scar with all the same importance, traveler. You say there's only a woman and their servants in those wagons, but who's to say they aren't full of armed men, just waiting for our guard to drop?" "Rosen, I don't think—" Fotter started, reaching out to clasp the younger man's shoulder. "He never said his father's name!" Rosen accused, voice growing shriller as he leveled a finger towards Ard. Piero noted that at least a few other townsfolk had noticed the newcomers, and were beginning to gather to the sounds of Rosen's shouts. Ard glanced around nervously at the slowly accumulating crowd. Piero found he could sympathize. He didn't care much for attention himself, and it seemed as though the young nobleman had planned to slip into town without much fanfare. "I can understand your suspicion." He raised his palms placatingly towards Rosen. "If it would settle your mind, my father's name was Flint's. May he rest at the side of the one. You can inspect our wagons inside and out, though I can assure you the only weapons we carry are for our own defense and little else." Fotter gave Ard an appreciative look, then turned to the gaggle of villagers. "Nothing to be alarmed about, friends. Just a few visitors for the winter season. The watch will sort everything." Piero knew he should set an example and head off to finish his business in town, but it was difficult to fight his curiosity and tear himself away. Fotter and Rosen approached the wagons, the younger man moving with far more caution than the older, who stopped beside Piero to catch his ear. "I know you aren't part of the watch, son, but would it be too much trouble for you to search with us? The faster we get these poor folks settled, the better, you understand? I don't expect there's anything to find. This Ard fellow seems a decent sort, and Broken Scar isn't much of a prize for robbers." "Always happy to lend a hand," Piero agreed readily, though not without a brief look back at his abandoned pushcart. His father would be expecting him home within the hour. He could afford to finish this quick and then go to sell the grain and get the medicine. You're a good lad, Halftroll. A fine lad indeed. Together, Piero and the guards approached the caravan, with Ard trailing just behind. As they did so, the bodyguard, Thel, clambered out of the rear of the wagon, and behind him came 3 women, all different ages. The first was an old maid, bony and with a heavy brow and pinched features. She was carrying a large bag with her, wearing a simple servant's shift. Behind her came a mere girl, younger than even Piero was, clutching 2 little bundles that mewled and fretted as they came. The 2 newborn babes, Piero reckoned, craning his neck to try and get a glimpse of the children, though it was the last lady in line that quickly arrested his attention. This must have been the Lady Corinne, and Piero knew at a glance that his suspicions had been correct. This family had to be nobility of some sort, there was no doubt about it. She was finely dressed and poised. Even climbing out of the back of a dusty wagon, she carried the same grace as if she was stepping out of a fancy carriage. Her hair was tied back elegantly with a silk ribbon, and while she was much smaller than he was, Piero still somehow felt small in front of her. It was not dissimilar to the feeling of authority he had always felt exuded from his betters when he was a small child. As her gaze swept over himself and the guards, he felt compelled to avert his eyes and avoid meeting hers. "What is the meaning of this?" the lady snapped irritably, crossing her arms and placing herself firmly between the guardsmen and the wagon. Ard quietly massaged the bridge of his nose and muttered something indistinct. The servant women tended to the children. "Apologies, milady." Father gave a respectful bow of the head. "Myself and my fellow, Rosen here, just need to give these wagons a once-over before we let anybody into town. Just part of the job, you see, to keep everyone safe and happy." The lady surveyed them all with unabashed disdain. "A once-over? Do you even have the slightest idea to whom you speak? I am—" She was cut off suddenly as Ard stepped forward and gripped her arm tightly, his eyes flashing with severity. Something unspoken passed between the 2 of them, as if they were holding an entire conversation with only their eyes, and the Lady Corinne jerked her arm out of Ard's grip. She regarded the young man icily, and then seemed to smooth out her features and breathed deeply. When she spoke next, it was with a bashful little smile to Father and Rosen. "Forgive me, Watchman," she said demurely. "The weeks of travel and the sudden terrible news about my servant Bross must have affected my mind. You are, of course, welcome to fulfill your duties to Broken Scar, but I wonder if I might speak to the village alderman in the meantime. I'd like to get our affairs in order and sort out lodgings for myself and my staff." Piero noted that she made no mention of her husband's brother, and it was clear that there was little love between the 2 of them. "Of course, milady," Father replied cheerfully. "And how long exactly were you good folks planning on staying with us here in Broken Scar? Is this a winter holiday, or something more permanent?" "I'm afraid that's something I'll need to speak to the alderman about, Watchman, if it's all the same to you." Lady Corinne smiled at Father, but even Piero could sense the tiniest hint of steel in her voice and face. Her smile was lovely, but strained at the edges, as if she was trying to signal without speaking that her patience was very nearly at its end, and that a terrible fate would befall any man who did not do exactly as she asked of him right away. He grinned ruefully, glad to be a nobody and beneath the lady's attention. Father and Rosen wisely did not press the issue. It seemed that the younger guard's suspicions had been quickly alleviated as soon as the beautiful noblewoman had shown herself, and now both men seemed eager to finish up this business and get back to the much less complicated job of standing in front of the town gate, doing nothing. A thought occurred to Piero, just as he was stepping forwards to clamber into the wagon and begin to search. Lodgings for the winter, that's what this lot was after, and he recalled the abandoned house near the mill that his mother had left behind when she had fled from Duero country. It was, perhaps, not quite the kind of house that these good people would be used to living in. There was little good furniture, and the roof had a leak, but it was large enough to accommodate all of them, and Piero could fix the place up quickly enough. It would take a lot of effort to get it tidied and properly livable, but the Lady Corinne had servants to assist with that, and many hands made light work, as the saying went. More importantly, there was opportunity here. The Argenta taught that a good deed done for others often came with its own rewards for the doer, and Piero could see that this was a family of some wealth and status. Obviously they were nobles, and he needed money to care for his father. Perhaps a good turn done for them would result in a good turn done for him throughout the winter. At the very least he had to try, didn't he? "Excuse me, Mr. Ard?" He spoke up, trying to sound adult and confident, though the young man and himself were likely about the same age. Ard, the servants, and the Lady Corinne turned and looked up at him, as if seeing him for the first time. There was a brief stretch of silence as the whole lot of them seemed to take in his massive stature and ethereal fairness. "To whom do I owe the pleasure?" Ard replied, offering a hand to the young miller. Piero grasped it gingerly, hoping he didn't grip tightly enough to injure. "Ah, this is Halftroll Piero, the son of Edgar. You won't find a more decent fellow in all of Broken Scar." Fodder introduced him, and Piero felt his face flush at the compliment. "He's the miller, not part of the watch," Rosen added in. "I see," Ard replied, and as his eyes met Piero's, he couldn't help but think that the nobleman was searching for something in his face. "And what can I do for you?" Suddenly Piero felt a moment's hesitation. It was a big decision to offer his mother's house to a group of strangers who had only just arrived in town. Would it not have made more sense to speak to his father about this before making the offer? After all, the house was Edgar's, not his to give freely. And besides that, it had not been lived in for almost 2 decades. Would these people even want it? Or would he just be embarrassing himself? Maybe it was better to do nothing, to let them sort out their lodgings on their own. There was also the matter of who they really were. Ard had freely spoken his father's name, and there were no armed bandits inside the wagons looking to leap out and attack them. But there was still some suspicion surrounding this family. Piero was not so dull as to not have noticed the unspoken argument between the Lady Corinne and Ard when she had been about to harangue the watchmen. They were hiding something, that much was for certain, and Piero had no love for secret-keepers. But he needed money, and offering up the old house was a doorway that could lead to saving his father further down the line. Either way, he had to make the decision now. There was no time to deliberate any longer. "The choice is yours,"